Reaching far back into antiquity, seafaring civilizations have relied upon beacons and lighthouses to ensure safe passage for mariners. But all too often, these noble constructions have ended up tainted by tales of torment and tragedy, playing host to mysterious and inexplicable events which have played out under the beacon's glare. But first, do you like murder mysteries and puzzle solving? Are you tired of the same old game nights and looking for something new to experience with your partner, friends, family, or even by yourself? Then this week's sponsor is for you, Hunter Killer. Hunter Killer produces immersive story-driven murder mystery games. In these games you're the detective and you have been tasked with cracking the case. You'll need to sort through physical evidence, examine statements, autopsy reports, and even liaise with contacts via email in order to solve the mystery. It's like an escape room delivered right to your door, which can be played on your own or as part of a group. Players can choose from standalone single-part crime cases, multi-chapter mystery boxes, or an exclusive monthly subscription storyline which unfolds over 6 months. I've recently been playing a box set called Off the Record. Taking place in the fictional town of Copper Cliffs, Arizona, a young journalist by the name of Ashley Mendoza is found dead after reporting on the local mayoral elections. You are approached by her friend Franny in order to investigate the case and solve her murder. I was blown away by just how intricate the evidence packs were, with trinkets and items which I found myself wanting to keep long after I'd cracked the case. I got Off the Record as part of the sponsorship deal, but I am seriously considering buying another Hunter Killer case to crack, and anyone who enjoys sleuthing and puzzle solving should definitely consider the investment. Click the link in the description or pinned comment and use the promo code BEDTIME for a $10 discount on a game night you will never forget. It is no mere coincidence that the events depicted in our very first episode just so happened to transpire in and around a remote lighthouse situated on the Flannan Isles to the northwest of Scotland. While such locations represent reassurance and safety for those travelling nearby, quite the opposite could be true for the hardy souls who maintain them. All too often, these beacons were constructed in some of the most inaccessible locations on the planet, resulting in lengthy periods of crushing isolation for those who manned them. They were also prone to horrific environmental conditions, requiring operators to possess deep reserves of initiative and resolve in order to survive. As haunting as the disappearance of the Ailenmore lighthouse keepers may be, other cases have proven equally disturbing, even when the ultimate fate of the keepers is known. One such instance is the events which occurred at the Smalls Lighthouse in Pembrokeshire at the turn of the 19th century. Deep in the winter of 1801, the crews of passing ships had reported to the local port authorities that they had received signals from the lighthouse keepers requesting urgent assistance. Efforts to attend the isolated rock station would be hampered by horrendous weather conditions, which repeatedly drove back any attempt at rescue. Eventually, as the weeks passed and the winter gales finally subsided, a boat was able to battle through the waves and make landfall. But having hurried up and across the rocks towards the building, the rescuers would soon find themselves in the epilogue of a soul-destroying tragedy. The two keepers who had manned the station were known to argue with one another in public, and when one of them passed away from natural causes, the other had feared being accused of murder. So instead of committing the body of his colleague to the sea, he had placed it inside a makeshift coffin and then lashed it to the railings outside. But in the high winds, the casket had smashed open, leaving the arms of the rotting corpse to hang down and scrape across the windows of the lighthouse. Over the following weeks in complete isolation, the surviving keeper had almost gone insane, believing that the corpse of his colleague was beckoning him to his death. A similar situation would play out half a century later, on a small island situated just off the coast of Maine, New England. Following a series of shipwrecks, in 1855, the US Army were ordered to construct a lighthouse near the town of York in order to prevent further tragedies from occurring. The location which the engineers finally settled upon was Boone Island, a rocky shoal that jutted up and out of the sea, roughly 6 miles from the town. A number of keepers would come and go from the lighthouse which was constructed there, prior to the eventual arrival of Lucas Bright and his young wife, Kathleen. But only 4 months after the newlyweds had moved in to maintain the facility, local residents noticed that the light had gone out. Braving the howling December tempest, a deputation of local fishermen hurriedly rowed across to the island, finding the living quarters there eerily deserted. Upon entering the adjoining tower, they encountered a dying Kathleen, sitting with her back propped up against the bottom of the stone staircase. The young woman was pale and emaciated, a shadow of her former self, and was cradling the frozen remains of her husband in her lap. Kathleen survived long enough to explain that during a particularly strong gale, Lucas had set off from the cottage to ensure that the light had enough oil to last out the storm. But he'd not travelled far when he had been swept off his feet by a huge, unexpected wave, before then being pulled out into the freezing waters. Witnessing his plight, Kathleen had acted swiftly, tying a rope to her waist and then diving headlong into the raging seas after him. Several minutes later, she was finally able to take hold of her inert husband, battling back to the shoreline and hauling him clear of the surf. Despite her best efforts, the anguished bride had been unable to revive her dead husband. Kathleen had spent the next week maintaining the lamp as best she could, slowly succumbing to a fever she had sustained from her doomed rescue attempt. In the years that followed, many passing mariners reported seeing a mysterious figure dressed all in white, standing out alone on the rocks. Rumours soon circulated that this was Kathleen's ghost, grief-stricken and too tormented by the loss of her husband to move on from the location. Subsequent keepers reported hearing footsteps moving around the living quarters at night, and a faint tapping on the wooden door of the cottage, despite being alone on the island. One employee, named David Wells, went on to relate a mysterious incident he had experienced when posted to the island during the 1970s. At the time he worked there with his colleague, they had been allowed to keep a pet Labrador for company. But Wells stated that the dog quickly became too difficult to control, often visibly agitated and refusing to settle within the confines of the island's cottage. Upon entering unoccupied rooms, it would snarl and growl, apparently focusing its attention on some invisible figure moving around inside the building. On several occasions, the keepers would see the dog apparently chasing this same unseen entity across the rocks, cornering its quarry and attacking, before then turning and sprinting back to the cottage in fear. Far away on the opposite side of the Atlantic Ocean, the French authorities would find themselves investigating a series of unsettling incidents of an eerily similar nature. Over the centuries, various vessels had been lost whilst approaching the coast of Brittany, coming to founder upon a group of treacherous islands known as the Pointe du Raz. So prolific was the number of ships lost amongst these rocky shoals that legend abounded they must have been occupied by death itself, Locals told stories of sailors being swept away from sinking vessels, disappearing into the island's caves through sinister portals and into the very depths of hell. In 1875, after several difficult years of construction, the Tevenek Lighthouse was finally activated, in a bid to prevent any further losses. But whilst this rock station would indeed be successful in preventing further deaths of sailors approaching the French coastline, the same could not be said of its custodians. The contract offered by the local government to potential keepers demanded a full year of service, stationed alone at the lighthouse. The first successful applicant was a man named Henri Gizenek, who duly took up his post in complete seclusion upon the island. But not long after his arrival, the keeper began to share stories with the sailors who transported his supplies, which caused them great concern. Gizenek became convinced that he was not alone on the island, stating that at night he could hear other voices murmuring off in the darkness. These unknown whisperers spoke in a variety of languages, including Breton and Flemish, but all seemed to be saying the same thing: that the island was damned and that he should remove himself from it immediately, or share the fate of those who had died there before him. At the end of his contract, the outgoing custodian was ordered by his employers not to speak of the matter to anyone else, lest other applicants be deterred from the position. Several weeks after the arrival of his successor, a man named Minot, the supply ship found the new keeper expectantly waiting for them at the end of the pier. The unfortunate soul was manic and wild-eyed, demanding that they remove him from the island immediately and take him back to the mainland with them. Having been calmed down, the haunted Minot stated that not long after his arrival, he had begun to hear murmuring as he had been trying to sleep. This sinister chorus of whispering voices, which had gradually penetrated the walls of his cottage from the outside, could soon be heard inside his bedchamber at night. The decision was made to double the number of men stationed at the lighthouse, but not 6 months into their tenure, one of the new pair of keepers was found lying dead in the lamp room. As it became increasingly difficult to find staff who were prepared to maintain the lighthouse, an ever more unconventional cast of characters took up the post. A man by the name of Melipe was found deceased in his bed by his colleague when he did not come down for breakfast one morning. The dead man's eyes were wide open, staring up at the ceiling, his arms stiff and raised as if he had been trying to ward off some unknown attacker. Years later, a former sailor named Rupar agreed to take the position, on the understanding that he could live there with his ailing father for company. The old man was bedbound and soon told his son that he did not want to stay on the island, saying that there were shadows in his room which were moving around him at night. Rupar had dismissed these stories as a trick of the mind, only to then find his father dead one morning, having apparently opened his own throat with a razor during the night. Turning to families to maintain the lighthouse did not seem to assist the authorities, with the sinister and bizarre incidents there seeming to continue. During a particularly violent tempest, as the wife of one of the subsequent keepers was in the throes of childbirth, the wall of their accommodation suddenly collapsed, fully exposing them to the raging gale. Eventually, despite their reluctance, the local magistrates agreed that a priest was to be approached and asked to exorcise the island. After several unsuccessful attempts, the holy man resorted to walking around the perimeter of the location, setting crucifixes into the rocks at certain points. This appeared to solve the problem, with no further incidents reported at the lighthouse until it was eventually automated in 1910. There has been a lighthouse on Isla Villalobos since the middle of the 19th century. As with many lighthouses situated just off the Uruguayan coastline, it has been fully automated for some time, only requiring periodic maintenance from the mainland. But prior to this, it was the responsibility of the military to maintain the facility, with a detachment of 5 soldiers ordered to remain there for a period of 2 weeks at a time. During October of 1972, the team stationed at the island was under the command of Naval Captain Francisco Cascuda. On the evening of the 28th, the officer and his men had all been seated in the recreation room of the living quarters, watching television. Procedure dictated that the generators were to be checked at 10 p.m. every night, with the corporal named Juan Fuentes selected to carry out this mundane task. But upon departing the main building, Fuentes had come to an immediate halt, catching sight of a series of lights playing across the roof of the nearby generator building. Realizing that it was impossible for these to be vehicle headlights due to the isolated nature of the location, the NCO's hand quickly dropped to his sidearm. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he caught sight of a small vessel, apparently perched on the flat roof of the generator building, approximately 6 meters off the ground. The lights projected by this craft were a variety of white, yellow and violet, and were illuminating 3 small figures moving around beneath it. Fuentes could see that the trio were wearing tight-fitting black suits, similar to those worn by divers. Their heads also appeared to be bulbous and slightly elongated, as if they were wearing helmets. Catching sight of the watching corporal, the 3 figures immediately ceased what they were doing. As Fuentes stepped forward and raised his sidearm, he felt a sudden and unexpected shock, similar to a bolt of electricity shooting up through his body. The outstretched arm which held his pistol began to tremble uncontrollably, and he could feel the hairs on his skin standing up on end. The trio then began to clamber back up into their craft, as the corporal developed a strong inclination that firing his weapon would have no effect, almost as if the very suggestion had been placed into his mind. Moments later, the object began to vibrate, levitating above the generator building, despite having no visible engine or exhaust. It then hurtled away at great speed into the night sky, away from the lighthouse and back towards the Uruguayan coastline. Finding himself free to move again, the young corporal had immediately hurried inside to inform his comrades of the incident. But despite a thorough search of the roof of the generator building and the surrounding area, there was no trace of the mysterious visitors. Noting the incident in his diary, Captain Cascuda had thought little of the matter, only to be summoned by his superiors shortly after their return to the mainland. Having related the incident in further detail, he was then asked to accompany Corporal Fuentes to the American Embassy in Montevideo. There, they spent several hours answering questions about the encounter and drawing pictures of the craft before being dismissed. In the years that followed, Cascuda made discreet inquiries into the incident, always receiving the same summary from those he spoke to. Neither the Uruguayan nor American authorities had any idea what it was that Corporal Fuentes had seen, but they had no reason to doubt his testimony. The matter has remained a complete mystery ever since. As interesting as these tales are, there is no denying that the isolated and inaccessible nature of the lighthouses involved played some part in the events which unfolded. The fact that the people who manned them were often alone and longed for human contact more than likely pushed them to an eventual breaking point, leaving them open to suggestion. On the other hand, it may be that this very isolation exposed them to contact with the unknown, particularly in the case of the Isla Villalobos lighthouse. With the visitors witnessed by Corporal Fuentes taking a risk out of necessity, perhaps landing in a place they thought was deserted, in order to facilitate repairs or maintenance to their craft. As more of these lighthouses become automated and less of a human presence is required, it is unlikely that we'll ever fully understand what happened in many of these unfortunate incidents. These reports will simply pass into nautical legend, only adding to the many mysteries of the sea.